My name is Lucius Aurelius. I am a Roman. I shall recount a tale of how a single day divided my life into before and after. A story of a city that vanished beneath ash in mere hours. A narrative of loss, fear, hope, and how even after the conclusion of the world one can find the strength to begin anew. Listen closely. This is my truth. My name is Lucius Aurelius. I was born and raised in Pompeii, a city where life thrived vivaciously and seemed as eternal as the mountains themselves. At the age of 30, I was a merchant, dealing in fine fabrics imported from distant lands. My shop stood along a bustling street adjacent to the Forum, a place where destinies were determined, where one could procure everything from olive oil to the finest Indian silk. Pompeii was a wondrous place. Mornings were infused with the aromas of freshly baked bread, spices, and moist earth. Marketplaces buzzed with the clamor of vendors. Women chattered while selecting fish and fruits, and children raced with exuberant cries between the columns. The marble streets gleamed under the sun. Fountains sang in every courtyard, and roses and laurel flourished in the gardens. Life flowed steadily. We celebrated festivals, marveled at the new mosaics gracing the homes of the elite, and debated politics and weather in the baths. In the Thermopolia, over cups of wine, we could hear the latest gossip, while in the amphitheater we witnessed gladiatorial combats that filled our hearts with both awe and terror. We were surrounded by wealth and luxury. It seemed as if it would last forever. Who could have imagined, gazing at the serene silhouette of Vesuvius rising into the sky, that it harbored a wrath capable of obliterating us all? Occasionally the ground would quiver faintly beneath our feet, but we merely laughed it off. Earthquakes were a familiar occurrence here. No elder in the Forum would have foreseen disaster. I resided in a spacious home adorned with mosaic floors and an inner garden encircled by a colonnade. My finest fabrics were displayed in the shop front, enticing affluent patrons. Servants tended to my household, while friends gathered in the evenings to discuss politics or engage in a game of dice. Yet, something peculiar lingered in the air. A faint scent of sulphur occasionally wafted through the narrow streets. In the early mornings, when silence still enveloped the city, one could discern a barely audible whisper, as if the very earth was attempting to warn us. However, the concerns of daily life drowned out all fears. There were too many responsibilities, too many aspirations binding us to this city. I was preparing for a transaction that I hoped would elevate me to the status of the most esteemed merchant in the region. A caravan from the east had delivered a shipment of rare fabrics, purple and gold, that would inspire admiration even among the patricians. I needed only to arrange a showing and sell them for a handsome price. My mind was consumed with thoughts of how to present the merchandise, whom to invite, and what wine to serve at the reception. Something dreadful loomed over the city, yet we were too engrossed to notice. We were overly confident in our strength, in our seemingly endless fortune, in the favor of the gods. And so came that fateful day when our familiar world began to crack, and I, oblivious, remained unaware that every decision I made henceforth would bear a cost beyond mere money or reputation, but rather my very life. In the weeks leading up to the great calamity, the earth began to disturb us with increasing frequency. At first, there were mere tremors, as if some colossal hand were gently shaking the ground beneath our homes. In the taverns, the elders waved it off. Nonsense. Worse things have happened. Even the priests in the temples dismissed it, claiming it was merely the customary wrath of subterranean spirits that would soon subside. I remember one evening, during dinner with friends, when a heavy chalice of wine swayed slightly on the table. We exchanged glances and laughed. Someone jokingly suggested making a sacrifice to Vesta, the goddess of the hearth. Laughter drowned out the unease that had coursed through my heart. After all, we were in Pompeii, a city that seemed to garner envy from the gods themselves. The following morning, I ventured to the market. The weather was oppressively hot, yet beneath my feet I sensed a peculiar tremor, barely perceptible, as if the earth was sighing. Vendors grumbled about the heat. Fishermen bemoaned the restless sea. The local gods, they said, demanded greater reverence. Once again, no one took these occurrences seriously. I was absorbed in my pursuits. My shop thrived. In anticipation of the new shipment of fabrics, I ordered expensive wooden shelves adorned with intricate carvings. Workers busied themselves at the entrance, hammering on the new adornments, and each strike of the hammer drowned out my doubts. When one of my assistants complained about cracks appearing in the storeroom walls, I ordered them to be promptly filled with clay, without a moment's hesitation. As evening approached, sitting in the shade of my garden, I felt the leaves on the trees quiver slightly. There was no breeze, no sound, only a strange shudder passing through everything around me. I stood up, listening intently. Somewhere in the distance, a dull thud echoed, as if a stone had rolled into a ravine. But once again, silence reigned, so profound that I could feel a ringing in my ears. In those days, the city seemed to accelerate its pace. Festivals grew more extravagant, feasts louder. People, sensing an unacknowledged anxiety, sought to drown it out with wine, games, and merriment. The theaters showcased comedies while the amphitheaters staged combats. Magistrates announced the construction of new buildings, as if the future were boundless. I continued preparing for my deal. Merchants from Naples and Capua were invited to a grand presentation of the goods. I ordered the finest wines from Cumae, fresh olives and cheeses from distant farms. The day of the celebration approached, and with it, a strange, oppressive weight filled the air. Occasionally, early in the morning, unusual clouds would rise over Vesuvius, darker than usual, as if smoke were concealed within their depths. Fishermen at the docks exchanged words about the peculiarities of the sea. It had turned murky and heavy, and the fish had vanished. On several occasions, I heard dogs howling in the middle of the night, cats hid away, birds would suddenly soar upward in large flocks for no apparent reason. One day, as I passed by the temple of Apollo, I noticed the statue sway ever so slightly, as if nudged by an unseen force. The priests hastened to proclaim it a sign of fortune, conducting a sacrifice, and once again the people were reassured. As for me, I convinced myself that everything was under control. The goods had been delivered, friends invited, and my home gleamed with fresh paint. I dreamed of expanding my business, perhaps constructing another house, or even opening a shop in Rome itself. I was filled with plans, much like everyone around me. We lived as if we had all the time in the world ahead of us. The earth whispered warnings, but who was listening? We were too blinded by our confidence to grasp the language of nature. And when the morning arrived that would change my life forever, my thoughts were solely on profits, the celebration, and a future that was never to come. That day began as usual. The sun rose over Vesuvius, painting the rooftops in a golden hue. The heat enveloped the city from the very first hours, thick, viscous, as if it were oil. I awoke early, donned a simple tunic, and set off to my shop. In my mind I rehearsed the final preparations for the celebration. The fabrics needed to be arranged so that the light danced upon their surfaces, and I had to ensure the wine was served chilled. The streets were alive with the chatter of vendors. The market was filled with aromas, fresh bread, sizzling fish, ripe dates. Servants hurried about on errands. Women haggled over prices, and children laughed, playing knucklebones on the pavement. Everything was as it always was, until a single moment changed everything. The first tremor echoed like distant thunder, yet the sky remained clear. I turned to look at Vesuvius and froze. A dark column of smoke rose ominously above the mountain, thick and almost black, as if night were spilling across the blue sky. It grew swiftly, expanding as though someone were releasing smoke from the mouth of an endless fire. At first, the crowd stood in confused silence. Some laughed, pointing toward the mountain, while others exchanged alarmed glances. A whiff of sulfur filled the air, and the ground trembled beneath our feet, powerfully, enough to crack mosaics and cause shop signs to sway. I dashed back to my home. Inside, everything shook. Jugs toppled from shelves, ceramics shattered on marble floors. Servants ran in a panic. Some were crying. I ordered them to gather the most valuable items: money, documents, several pieces of fine fabric. Time seemed to contract, transforming into a series of moments filled with noise, screams, and terror. When I stepped back outside, the city had transformed. Dark flakes of ash began to fall from the sky, scorching our skin. At first, they fell sparsely, like strange, hot snow. Then they thickened, descending more rapidly. People donned tunics on their heads, covered their faces with cloaks, coughing and shouting. I saw a mother dragging her 2 small children by the hand, shielding them with her body from the ash raining down. Elders sat directly on the ground, unable to rise, hiding their faces in their hands. I understood. I could not remain here. The streets filled with fleeing crowds. Some pushed carts laden with everything they could grab: gold, statues, household goods. Others rushed forward, carrying nothing but children in their arms. A young man sprinted past me, 2 jugs of wine clutched tightly. At that moment, it was the most precious thing he possessed. I raced toward the warehouse where my fabrics were stored. The gates stood wide open, and darkness loomed inside. Lime rained down from the ceiling. I glanced at the piles of silk, the finely woven fabrics from Tyre that had cost a fortune. My heart sank. Everything I had worked for over the years could vanish within mere hours. Still, I turned away. What did wealth matter in the face of death? As I burst back outside, the ash lay thick upon the ground. The sky had darkened as if night had fallen. By the flickering light of the dim torches that some residents had managed to ignite, the faces of the people appeared as masks of fear. I made my way toward the forum, hoping to find my friends. The square was nearly deserted. Only a few panicked individuals argued about where to flee: to the mountains or the sea. At the center stood a statue of Jupiter, half covered in a layer of ash. I approached it and saw Marcus, my neighbor, sitting on the temple steps, staring blankly at the sky. "Lucius, is this the end?" he asked hoarsely. I didn't know how to respond. I simply took his hand and pulled him along with me. We decided to head toward the sea. Boats were always docked in the port, offering a chance to escape. Around us, buildings crumbled. Walls collapsed with a roar, and the cries of those buried alive echoed. The ground beneath our feet breathed, its waves visible to the naked eye. Everything around us groaned, creaked, and shattered. The sky had turned nearly completely black. Lightning burst forth from the depths of Vesuvius, tearing through the darkness with bloody flashes. It seemed as though the gods themselves had lost their minds, battling for our souls. I struggled to move faster, although each step was a tremendous effort. Ash stuck to my sandals, making it hard to breathe. My shoulders burned from the hot particles, and I wrapped myself in my tunic, leaving only a slit for my eyes. As we navigated one of the narrow streets, we encountered an old man with a girl. He leaned on a stick, unable to go any further. The girl tugged at his hand, urging him forward. Without a second thought, Marcus and I took the old man by his arms and dragged him along with us. Time lost all meaning. We walked through the darkness, inhaling the hot air, feeling the ash accumulate around our ankles. Somewhere nearby, someone cried out for help. Elsewhere, more walls tumbled down. The world around us was deafeningly silent and ablaze. At last, when we reached the broad descent to the sea, I turned back to look. Where life had thrived just that morning now stood an enormous gray mound. Pompeii was vanishing before my eyes, buried beneath ash and stone. Yet in that moment, I still believed we could be saved. Boats awaited us in the harbor. The sea seemed to be our last hope, and I, gasping for breath, singed and clutching the old man's hand in one, while in the other I held my last bundle containing the most precious remnants of my life, stepped forward into the realm of hope. The maritime path appeared to be salvation. However, upon reaching the shore, I realized I was mistaken. The rain of ash showed no sign of stopping. Everything was enveloped in a thick haze of ash and smoke, through which only the feeble glow of torches struggled to penetrate. People crowded the dock, shouting, calling for their loved ones, trying to break through to the boats. Some collapsed onto the stone slabs of the quay, never to rise again. The sea roared. Waves hurled remnants of boats ashore. The water seemed to have gone mad, just like the earth itself. The vessels that still floated rocked perilously on the waves, clinging to their ropes as if desperately trying to carry someone away with them. In the midst of this chaos, I held the old man and the girl close, feeling Marcus tremble with fear beside me. How could we escape? The boats were overflowing. Some fought forcibly for space. Others plunged into the water, attempting to swim towards the distant ships, disappearing into the turbulent Black Sea. I made a decision. We wouldn't wait any longer. I led my companions along the shore, hoping to find an empty boat or some form of shelter. The ash crunched between my teeth. The taste of sulfur hung in my throat. A thin layer of grime and ash coated my body. We trudged onward, almost blindly, deeper into the misty shoreline, moving further away from the city's dock. At times I lost sight of them. The girl clung to my tunic. The old man breathed heavily, stumbling at every step. Marcus was somewhere nearby, his voice wavering from the right to the left. Step by step, in this sweltering hell, we made our way along the line of water. At one point, I heard a chilling scream. Turning around, I witnessed a large piece of wall, a fragment of one of the warehouses, crash down upon the fleeing crowd. Dust erupted, and the cries abruptly ceased. I closed my eyes momentarily, fighting against the surge of terror threatening to overwhelm me. We pushed onward. Running was the only answer to death. In the distance, through the fog, I spotted a small boat washed up on the shore. It bobbed on the waves, tethered to an old wooden pole. There was no one else around. We dashed toward it. The boat was old and battered, already collecting a bit of water inside. But at this moment it was all we had left. With great effort we helped the old man and the girl into the boat. Then Marcus and I pushed the vessel away from the shore and jumped in, seizing the oars. We rowed into the void. The sea was black and ferocious. Waves tossed us back and forth. Ash continued to fall from the sky, the water in the boat rising. I felt my muscles ache from exertion, and my eyes sting from the hot air. But we refused to give in. Each stroke of the oars was a fight for survival. As the shore disappeared into the mist, we briefly thought we were saved. But then something worse began. The sky was split by a new explosion. A rumble resounded behind us, shaking everything around. I turned and saw a fresh cloud erupting from the mouth of Vesuvius, darker than the last, broad as the world itself. From it flowed everything, rocks, debris, and fiery droplets. The earth quaked so violently that the water around the boat boiled as if in a cauldron. The shock wave reached us moments later. The boat was thrust upwards, as if it were but a splinter. We all collapsed to the bottom, choking on water and coughing violently. I could hear the girl crying, the old man groaning. Marcus shouted that the boat had cracked, that we were sinking. We managed to bail out some of the water and stabilize ourselves. How we did not drown in that moment remains a mystery to me. The entire sky burned in shades of red, gray, and black. Lava flowed down the mountain in wide rivers, though it had yet to reach the shore. The primary imperative, however, was to keep moving. We rowed until our arms felt numb. We rowed even when it seemed our bodies would cease to obey us. I stopped feeling pain. I ceased to distinguish the faces around me. All that existed was the coldness of the sea, the heat of the air, and the relentless pulse of my heart shouting, "Survive! Survive! Survive!" Finally, through the haze, the shadow of land appeared ahead. I had no idea where we were or how many hours had passed. But land was there. With our last reserves of strength, Marcus and I dragged the boat to shallower waters. We pulled out the old man and the girl, then fell to our knees on the ash and dirt. When I lifted my head, I saw others around us, survivors, just like us, wrapped in rags, burned with hollow eyes. Some prayed while others simply sat, swaying back and forth. I glanced back. Where Pompeii had once stood, now there was only smoke, a gray cloud and a glow. The city had vanished. Everything I loved, everything I knew, all I had aspired to, was buried beneath a thick layer of death. I sat on the ground, feeling the viscous mud and hot stones beneath my hands. The girl nestled against me, trying to hide from the horrors of the world, while the old man wept silently. In that moment, I understood that nothing is more fragile than human life. Neither home, nor wealth, nor even the very ground beneath our feet. Nothing truly belongs to us. In an instant, everything can be swept away, washed out, destroyed. We had survived, yet the world we once knew no longer existed. As the first rays of sunlight pierced through the leaden veil, I rose to my feet. I knew we must move on. Otherwise, the death we had left behind would surely catch up with us. I had no idea where the road would lead. We followed the land away from the shore, away from the smoke and heat, toward a place that perhaps still held life. The old man leaned on me. The girl walked silently beside me, clutching the hem of my tunic. Marcus walked ahead, occasionally turning back to nod, indicating that the path was clear. Every part of my body ached. My skin was scorched, my hands covered in small burns, and my legs trembled with exhaustion. Yet something within urged me forward, a desire to live, a desire to protect those who walked alongside me. We trudged through the gray fields of ash. Trees stood as if encased in a dead frost, their branches breaking under the weight of the ash. Once there had been gardens, vineyards, villas of affluent citizens. Now there was a dead world. At times we encountered other fugitives. Some lay on the ground, having exhausted their last ounce of strength. Others walked, supporting their relatives or carrying those who could not walk on their backs. No one spoke. Even the children were silent, as though they understood that in this new world, noise could cost a life. Closer to noon, we came upon a stream. The water was murky, covered with a layer of ash, but it was water nonetheless. We drank greedily, submerging our faces as animals do. Then I washed the old man and the girl, rinsing the grime and soot from their faces. Their eyes were red and inflamed, yet alive. Afterward, we continued on our journey. By evening, we began to see the first signs that life still existed. On top of the hill, houses emerged. A small village that had miraculously survived the devastation. Lazy wisps of smoke curled up above the rooftops, the scent of bread, the aroma of vibrant life. As we approached, wary gazes met us. People stood with pitchforks in hand, ready to defend their homes. I raised my hands to show that we posed no threat. We were merely remnants of that once great city, now buried beneath the earth. They allowed us to enter. We were given bread, water, and a place by the fire. The girl smiled for the first time that day upon receiving a piece of flatbread. The old man sighed heavily and fell asleep on the ground, resting against my shoulder. I sat by the fire, gazing up into the dark sky. Somewhere beyond the mountains, Vesuvius continued to belch clouds of smoke, as if to remind us that everything which once seemed eternal was an illusion. Marcus approached and sat beside me, silently handing me a mug of water. "We survived," he said quietly. I nodded. Yes, we had survived. But at what cost? That night, I hardly slept. Visions of familiar streets, ruined homes, faces of those I would never see again lingered before my eyes. I remembered the scent of spring evenings in Pompeii, the laughter of children in the square, and the music that filled the air during festivals. And now all of that was part of another world, a world that had ended in a single day. Yet alongside this despair, a new thought began to take root in my heart. If the gods had decided to spare us, it meant we still had some purpose. It implied that ahead lay new life. At dawn I rose. Marcus was already on his feet. We exchanged brief glances. Words still struggled to convey all that we had endured. I helped the old man to rise and took the girl's hand. We thanked the villagers for their hospitality and set forth once more toward new lands, toward a new life, where the memory of the fallen Pompeii would forever dwell in our hearts. With each step, I felt that I was no longer the Lucius Aurelius who had lived without a care amid wealth and festivities. I had become someone else, a person who knew the value of each day, each breath, and each smile on the faces of those I had managed to save. And perhaps this very knowledge was the true treasure that I had salvaged from the fiery hell. We walked for a long time. Days blended into one another, like faded canvases, yet to be painted with new colors. Occasionally we encountered other fugitives. At other times, ruined homes abandoned long ago by their owners fleeing from the madness of the mountain. There were moments when we encountered sheer emptiness, plains covered in gray ash, where no sound or life thrived. Yet we continued onward. With each passing day, my strength returned to me. I no longer stumbled with every step, as I had in the initial hours after our escape. I learned to discern by scent where the drinkable water lay and which soil could still nourish us. I grew tougher, more cautious. It was as if another person had blossomed within me, a person capable of surviving in places where I once would have perished in a day. Marcus remained by my side. He was quiet, but I saw the same determination reflected in his eyes. The girl, who we learned was named Livia, began to cry less and smile more often. The old man, however, grew weaker with each passing day. We both understood that he was holding on only for our sake. His life was approaching its twilight, yet he did not surrender while we still needed him. Finally, after long wanderings, we reached a large city that had been spared the wrath of Vesuvius. It welcomed us with the clamor of marketplaces, the shouts of vendors, and the enticing aromas of fresh bread and wine. Life flowed here as if nothing had happened, as if the catastrophe that had engulfed Pompeii were merely a dreadful dream. I watched the people hurrying about their business and the children laughing in the streets, feeling a strange ache within. How could they go on living, oblivious to the fact that not far away a world had collapsed, swallowing countless destinies? We found refuge in the home of an elderly merchant. Upon hearing our tale, he offered us a roof over our heads and work. I began assisting him in the warehouse, carrying goods, transcribing lists, and occasionally accompanying caravans. Marcus joined his security detail. The old man remained at home, where he was cared for, while Livia quickly became the darling of the entire street. Life gradually settled into a routine, yet I did not forget. At night, when the city fell silent, I would sit on the roof and gaze at the stars. And then, once more, images of Pompeii would rise before me. The streets where I had raced as a boy, the columns of temples, the glimmers of light on the marble slabs of the forums, the laughter of friends, the sound of fountains, the fragrances of shops filled with incense. All of this had vanished, yet it remained within me. I understood that I had to remember. I needed to share these memories with others. I had to preserve within myself that fragment of life buried beneath the ashes. Sometimes I would tell Livia about Pompeii, about the festivals, the games and the baths, our household gods, and our kind neighbor, the baker who always gave us fresh loaves. She listened with wide eyes, absorbing every word, as if trying to resurrect in her imagination a city that no longer existed. And then I saw it. Memory was alive. It had not perished along with the streets and temples. It was passed from me to her, from heart to heart. Months passed. One day the old man quietly slipped away in his sleep, at peace. We buried him outside the city walls, beneath cypress trees, where the wind whispered ancient songs. I stood at his grave for a long time, remembering how he had struggled to walk alongside me, how he had gripped my hand at the port on the last day of Pompeii. Only the three of us remained, Marcus, Livia, and I. One morning I realized it was time to move forward, not just to survive, but to build a new life. I started by opening a small workshop, crafting simple items, amphorae, jugs, and tools for the field. Soon I had apprentices, among them Marcus, who was clumsy with tools but determined. Livia grew, blossoming into a beautiful girl, both intelligent and kind. I never again called my new home Pompeii. No, it was something else entirely. Yet in every house I built, in every item that emerged from my hands, the memory of those streets I had lost lived on. I had transformed. From a boy who dreamt only of feasts and riches, I became a man who understood the value of life, of friendship, and of memory. And one day when Livia asked me who I had been before, I smiled and replied, I was a witness to the end of one world, but I became the builder of another. In that moment I realized, an end does not always mean destruction. Sometimes an end is merely the beginning, a beginning of a new path, a new world, a new self. And I moved forward, embracing life, carrying with me not the burden of loss, but the light of memory, a memory of the city that had once been my home. I am Lucius Aurelius, a witness to what has passed, but I choose to live, to create, and to remember, because the end is always the beginning of a new journey.